President Trump leaves for the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, Wednesday. He's expected to meet with world leaders and top business chiefs, but the trip comes amid international reaction from recent trade decisions made by the White House. White House correspondent Margaret Brennan is on the ground in Davos, and CBS News business analyst Jill Schlesinger is here with me in New York. Welcome to you both. Margaret, I'd like to start with you. President Trump is the first sitting U.S. president to attend the Davos summit since Bill Clinton in 2000. What does President Trump hope to accomplish during his time in Switzerland?
Well, it is pretty surprising that a president who campaigned on a platform of America First, a populist nationalist message, is coming to Davos, to the World Economic Forum, which is essentially ground zero of globalization and capitalism. It sounds contradictory, but President Trump says he's coming here because he wants to send the message that America is open for business. He's going to tout that success he had in lowering the corporate tax rate down to 21% in the U.S., and he's going to try to shore up foreign businesses' investment back into America. And he's going to meet privately with a number of CEOs. He's also going to do some diplomatic business while he's here. He'll meet with the Israeli Prime Minister, heads of state for the U.K., Rwanda and France. So it's a little bit of diplomacy as well. But this is really a chance for the president to tout his success and what he believes is his personal contribution to American economic growth. You hear him often complain that he feels he doesn't get enough credit for that, along with a 30% rise in stock prices since his election. Of course, most presidents try to be careful about connecting themselves to stock market run-ups, because when those go the other way, you don't want that blamed on you either.
Absolutely. Well, how do you think President Trump and his America First message will be received in Davos?
Well, the nationalist rhetoric is frankly unpopular in Europe, particularly among many European leaders, some of whom he's going to be meeting with. And so that doesn't go over well. But the business-friendly message does. And so President Trump has the closing keynote here at this summit, right alongside other heads of state. But really, he's being given the prime stage, and the World Economic Forum is hosting a dinner celebrating him on Thursday. So it's really an attempt, in some ways, you could say, to embrace and try to persuade President Trump to not go ahead with some of the more protectionist things that he has talked about supporting, whether it's renegotiating free trade deals like NAFTA or other bilateral deals that he's talked about, or some of these protectionist measures like the tariffs he's recently slapped on some foreign-made imports to the United States.
Well, Jill, the dollar slid further Wednesday after the Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin endorsed its decline during his remarks in Davos. Why are investors selling the currency?
Well, first of all, let's just get rid of the notion that a falling dollar is bad. It sounds bad because, hey, we're Americans and we want our currency to be strong. The only reason it's really bad is if you eat a lot of imported French cheese or olive oil from Italy. The reality is a lower value dollar is great for U.S. exporters. And the reason is that when we ship our goods overseas, compared to the local currency, our products and services look better and are actually more competitive. So the reality is that what is happening when Mnuchin is making these comments is he's sort of saying to the rest of the world, don't worry, we're not doing anything that we really want to strengthen the dollar. We want a low dollar, too. Remember, everybody who runs for office says we want a strong dollar. They get into office, a weak dollar is actually better.
Well, what about the recent trade moves on the part of the administration? What consequences will the American economy see as a result?
Well, the jury is really out on that because we know about the solar panels and washing machines that are being taxed, right? So let's just think about the solar ones. Okay, if you're a solar manufacturer, this is probably good news for you. But if you're a solar installer, it's not, because they need really cheap products to install. Well, if you look at the whole solar industry, by far the largest employer is the installer side of it, not the manufacturing side. So net, a lot of economists believe that this tariff on solar is actually going to see job reduction, not job increases.
Something to watch. All right, Margaret, on Tuesday, after imposing tariffs on imported solar panels, the president said there won't be a trade war. Meanwhile, a day later in Davos, Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross said the U.S. has been engaged in one for quite a while. What did Ross mean by that?
Well, that is one of the more controversial comments that the Commerce Secretary made when he was talking to one of the business networks, and that was after the Treasury Secretary made that other controversial remark you just talked about. Well, what we think the Secretary was trying to gesture to is what President Trump has campaigned on, which is this message that they believe, or they would argue, that the United States has been unfairly treated when it comes to entering other markets to sell American goods abroad. There is this perception, and the Commerce Secretary has talked about it, the President's talked about it, that somehow Americans are getting a raw deal. Of course, that's not always how market forces work, right? A cheap manufacturer may be cheap for a number of reasons, including labor costs and other contributing factors, not just because of this idea of taxing and tariffs. So Wilbur Ross, we believe, was talking about that sort of political view that they have, that America has been under siege in this extended trade war, particularly with China, which, you know, some would refer to as the world's Walmart, right? They make goods cheap, they sell them into markets around the world, and that's very hard for the United States to compete with. And this was central to what President Trump ran on politically, but the president was talking about it not in terms of market forces, but in terms of deliberate policies that he said past American presidents contributed to that harmed the American worker. So that's a perception issue that the Commerce Secretary, we believe, was talking about today.
Jill, let's talk about these specific trade agreements. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said Tuesday that the Trans-Pacific Partnership would move ahead without the United States. President Trump, as we've been discussing, has also threatened to pull out of the North American Free Trade Agreement. So where does all of that leave the United States in the global marketplace?
Well, I think it really depends on how these measures advance. But the reality is we live in a globalized economy. Now, I understand the president wants to stress fairness, and there's a point there. However, a lot of these supply chains are already in effect. When I speak to manufacturers in the United States, U.S.-only manufacturers, they're freaking out about changes to NAFTA. They're saying our entire supply chain in North America has been set in stone for 20 years. You start messing with that, Mr. President, then we are going to have problems. And I think the bigger picture here is that we want fairness and we want equity. We want to make sure that when we send our goods abroad, that they are treated with the same sort of fairness. But the problem that I see is that when you're looking at a change to these big trade deals, they're very destabilizing. You know, the World Economic Forum actually released last week its global risk analysis for 2018. And one of the big risks that it sees in this year is escalation of trade conflicts. This is where it could start. And with markets at all-time highs, you just need a whiff of anxiety to unnerve an investor.
All right, we are all waiting anxiously to see what President Trump says in Davos. Margaret Brennan and Jill Schlesinger, my thanks to you.